Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Tonight we are diving into part 2 of chapter 16 in the book of Jubilees. So let's get started.
All right, guys, let's get started in verse 10 of 16. And in this month, Abraham moved from Hebron and departed and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur in the mountains of Gerar. In the middle of the 5th month, he moved from thence and dwelt at the well of the oath. And in the middle of the 6th month, Yahuwah visited Sarah and did unto her as he had spoken, and she conceived. And she bare a son in the 3rd month, and in the middle of the month, at the time of which Yahuwah had spoken to Abraham, on the festival of the first fruits of the harvest, Isaac was born. And Abraham circumcised his son on the 8th day. He was the first that was circumcised according to the covenant which he ordained forever. And in the 6th year of the 4th week, we came to Abraham to the well of the oath, and we appeared unto him as we had told Sarah that we should return to her, and she would have conceived a son. And we returned in the 7th month and found Sarah with child before us, and we blessed him, and we announced to him all things which had been decreed concerning him, that he should not die till he should beget 6 sons more, and should see them before he died, but that in Isaac should his name and seed be called, and that all the seed of his sons should be Gentiles, and be reckoned with the Gentiles, but from the sons of Isaac one should become a holy seed, and should not be reckoned among the Gentiles. For he should become the portion of the Most High, and all his seed had fallen into the possession of Elohim, that it should be unto Yahuwah a people for his possession above all nations, that it should become a kingdom and priest and a holy nation. And we went our way, and we announced to Sarah all that we had told him, and they both rejoiced with exceeding great joy.
Okay, guys, so right away, this is not a retelling of what we've already discussed in previous videos, but this is the fruition coming to fruition of the things that was foretold of what was going to happen. So a lot of this, the first part of this is kind of just kind of recapping things that we've already discussed because it was foretold that this would happen, and now it's actually happening. So we have in verse 12 down here, Yahweh visited. Down here in 13, on the festival of the first fruits of the harvest, Isaac was born. In 14, he was circumcised on the 8th day, and that he was the first that was circumcised according to the covenant, that this was ordained forever. So a lot of this stuff right here in the very beginning. And even back up here in 16, that he would not die until he begat 6 more sons, and we discussed that. So I wanted to touch on those things and just kind of give a recap on that. If you want more detail about that, watch our previous video. There is a little note down here on the side, though, that I wanted to address. The person who put this together, it says regarding verses 15 and 16, it says the bracketed words are incorrect gloss according to Charles and should be omitted. So according to R.H. Charles, this is supposed to be omitted. The part where it says, as we had told Sarah that we should return to her and she would have conceived a son, and we returned in the 7th month and found Sarah with child before us. So just that section right there supposedly is supposed to be omitted. So maybe it was just put in there because those were the words that were used when it was told prior to. But as far as 17 through 19 that we just read, we might have a few more things to discuss here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really love in this telling of in Jubilees is the fact that we're seeing that promise of Messiah coming through the lineage of Abraham. And what I also love too is when we look in here, guys, and it talks about in 17, and it talks about it says, "In that all seed of his son should be what? Gentiles." Now, to me, I don't take that as a bad thing. I take that as a great thing, because in the end, it says there's neither Yehuda or Greek. That we're all, when we're all grafted into the promise of our Heavenly Father, right? So here it says, all the seed of his son should be Gentiles and be reckoned with the Gentiles, but from the sons of Isaac, one should become a what? A holy seed. This is, to me, it's just a futuristic talk of Messiah coming, and should not be reckoned among the Gentiles, which we know that Yeshua was born of Yehuda, of the offspring of the shoot of Jesse. And so we see this plan that God's had for a really long time since the garden. He's had a plan for all of us. And what's really nice about this is that this just isn't inclusive to being of the actual seed of Abraham. To me, when I see this in 17, it says, and all the seed of his son should be Gentiles. He's already got a plan to get us all into the family from right there. And so I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I think that's amazing that the followers, just through this one small passage, you can start to see that weaving, that tapestry, that plan that he has for that future, the future coming of Messiah.
Yeah, for sure. I think when we look at how small, and the Father says he chose the nation not because they were large, but because they were small. And when you look at already here, you just go off of statistics and probability. You have one son versus the other six. The probability of him outpacing the rest would be slim to none. But even though it says that in 18, for he should become the portion of the Most High. And later on in 18, it goes on to say it should become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And I think, when we start to look at those words, like you were saying, Joe, that it is a set apart type of deal. He was the first one to be circumcised according to that command that was given. And when the Father says, this will be the child of promise, there was never a lack of that promise. There was never a falter of that. And when you see that, we have to be very cognizant of how the Father works, and whenever he speaks to people and he gives them a promise, or he shows them something in the heavenly realm, or something of futures foretold, he never goes against that and never breaks that. And so whenever we see Isaac grow up, and when we see the lineage continue to follow down, you see that play out exactly how the Father would have planned it. And really what we're looking at is how do we see that in reverse, right? We're trying to look at it from today's mindset back then. But really, let's put ourselves in Abraham's shoes, Sarah's shoes, Isaac's shoes. You're growing up, you got all these brothers, kind of like Yeshua, kind of like Jacob, kind of like Joseph. You have all these brothers, and they're all looking at you like, yeah, right. Jesus, his brothers, they didn't even believe him. They lived with him. They saw he never sinned. They saw him do some pretty cool stuff, and they were like, nah, I'm good. So imagine Isaac's brothers. Hey, you're the one of promise. Your seed is the priest in the holy nation. So what are you trying to say about us? We're just the Gentiles. What is that supposed to mean? But like Joe mentioned earlier, that's not a distinguishing factor of who gets to come to the Father. It's just saying which one was set apart and which one is going to then bring all of the rest. So really Isaac's job was to bring all the brothers along with him. You're the holy nation. You be the light and bring them all along with you. So it's cool that no one's left out, even though he may have had a set apart group or set apart people.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say, I don't know that I agree with the way you necessarily phrase that, Joe, as far as it being a quote unquote good thing. I do think it's an awesome thing that the way you phrase that about it, the weaving and that path, that ability to be brought back in, that sort of thing. But remember, Gentile is a reference to those that are not in covenant. So I don't necessarily see that as a good thing, but the fact that through this priesthood there is a way for them to be brought back in. There is a way
Mm-hmm.
that has been made for them. So it does say that they will be reckoned amongst the Gentiles, or counted amongst the Gentiles,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't necessarily speak to them. I want to be careful how I say this, but it doesn't specifically say something along the lines of them being judged as a Gentile. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. I love what you guys were both saying about the Gentile aspect there. Although being a Gentile is not a good thing in and of itself, because it means not being in covenant, but the fact that everything is being put in place in this moment for that order, this prophetic
Right.
thing that will be to, that started off and will be to come, this ability for grafting in and all of that stuff. So yes, I think it's a beautiful picture being painted here.
Yeah. One of the things I would say to that, guys, you know, is the reason why I say I believe it's a good thing is because God's always made a way for us to be a part. You can always assimilate into the
Amen.
covenant. And
Amen.
so when I look at it, I don't know off the top of my head, maybe Jonathan, you can look it up if you want to, but where it talks about that he did not spare the original tree, the branches of the original tree, and that we were grafted in. Now, of course, there's the
Mhm.
warning given, like, hey, just because you're grafted in, don't be like, hey, you know, we're now it. And so what we're seeing here with the natural tree, the olive tree, and then with the wild olive branch being grafted in, you know, what I see in this is that the Father's always made a way. And just because, Kyle, what you were saying was, well, it's not a good thing not to, you know, be a Gentile because you're not into covenant, but these are covenant people that God was cutting out. So it really didn't matter to a certain extent if you were fully covenant or not, because if you weren't doing the right thing, God was going to be like, you got to go,
Right.
regardless of
Right.
your circumcision, but regardless of your covenant, regardless of your blood seed line, whatever you want to call it. He made a way for the Gentiles, or for anybody, because when we go back into Exodus, that was a mixed multitude that came out of Egypt. That was a lot of people group along with God's
Yeah.
people. But guess what? He made a way for them too. He didn't push them away and say, nope. By the way, when the Red Sea splits, you guys got to stay on this side. No, you can't come over. He allowed everyone
Right.
who wanted to be a part of Israel, you know, to be a part of it. So that's kind of where I was coming from. All that, I think it was seeing that God's plan from the beginning was, and he's showing, and I love it because what he's doing, he's showing the example to the covenant that, hey, just because you're covenant doesn't mean you're always going to, you know, if you don't do what's right, you're gone. By the way, you guys over here, I'm making a way for you so you can come into covenant, but don't be prideful because I'll cut you out just like I did the original branch. So,
Amen. Yeah, and I do think it's really cool too. And if you think about this from a arborist perspective, when branches are cut off, they don't die immediately, right? And we have reference to judgment we have these prophetic statements being used in Scripture about how the weeds will be tossed in the fire, right? That sort of thing. They'll be harvested at the same time. So we've got a lot of garden type stuff, analogies given in Scripture. But just because a branch is cut off doesn't mean that it is going to die immediately. As a matter of fact, when a branch is cut off, it depends on what is done with it as to what is gonna happen. If that branch is cut off and is not placed in some kind of like a soil or medium, if it's not given water, if it doesn't have the access to nutrients, things that it needs, yes, it's going to die slowly, much quicker than it would have if it was attached, right? But it's going to die. Now, the other thing though is it can be grafted in. It can be regrafted in. And if you don't know anything about agriculture and that sort of thing, look into grafting plants. It's also a way, and this is what's so beautiful about the Father's way. Even for those that get cut off, He allows them to be grafted back in.
Mhm.
And what it does is it provides for the ability for multiplication, not addition. And that's really cool.
Yep.
So He makes a way and makes it better. That's so cool.
Yeah, so both you guys made really good points there. And I think when we're kind of going through the whole idea of the natural branch and grafting in, and Isaac being part of that blessing and that covenant, Joe, I think you brought up a great point that no one's left out of it in a permanent state. Just because one was able to maintain that promise and hold on to that covenant, the goal of him was ultimately to bring all people to himself, right? Everybody's always find the people of covenant and join and do what they're doing. Be the sojourner, but then eventually be the people, right? You're the sojourner while you're learning, but then be fully grafted in. And what's really cool about being grafted in is, we read in Romans where it's talking about the natural branch versus the branches that were grafted in. And then even like you were talking about, Joe, you could even be taken away, right? And, we have the whole idea of coming back and propagation and different things like that. So I actually want to read for you guys there out of Romans chapter 11. And we're going to start in 17. All right, yeah, so starting in verse 17, it says, "But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I may be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief. But you stand fast through faith, so do not become proud, but fear." So just right there off that first beginning part, I mean, it just really just breaking down of like the language and the ideas and the concepts of what we're really looking at here. This isn't about an elitist mentality or a special DNA group or somebody who's, I get all the blessing and you get none. This is giving us some warnings. It's telling us don't be proud, but fear. Fear is the beginning of wisdom, right? We're supposed to walk out our salvation in fear and trembling, and not in a fear that we're scared or that we're always turning around the corner. Am I going to lose my salvation today? But how much do I love God and how far in line with Him do I want to be? So we'll continue where it says in 21, for if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will He spare you. Note then the kindness and the severity of God, severity toward those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in His kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God has the power to graft them in again. For if you were cut from what is by natural a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? And again, what I love about this is it's saying no matter what, right? No matter if you were in the part of the original covenant and you fell away, maybe as a nation, maybe as a people group, maybe as one of the 12 tribes, you found a way out of covenant. You found a way of cutting yourself off. Saying just as He brought in the foreigner, just he'll bring you back. And whether we're a part of the foreigner groups, the Gentiles, whatever group that we're a part of, He said all get back connected to the vine, all get back connected to the original source. He's saying even the vine itself is supported by something, and He's like, yeah, the root, and we're not that. No people are that. No person is that. So why would we get haughty and puffed up? Why would we get proud over that fact that we're a part of something bigger than ourselves? We forget that the thing that's bigger than ourselves is the reason we're sustained in the first place. So I think that's a beautiful verse, and I think we can see the understanding there in Romans of the topics like this we're reading here in Jubilees, and something that we really can carry with us as we have conversations with people all over the world.
Amen.
Yeah, and I would kind of add a little bit to that too, Jonathan, that, talks about not being haughty or being prideful about, you not being part of the original tree. And really, if your heart is in the right place, I believe your prayer should be that the brothers who were cut off from the tree, the original, that our prayer should be that they would return and be grafted back in with us, so that we can be one again. So,
yeah, like the prodigal son, for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we got to the end there in 19, and it says that, and they both rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And this is after, they're getting this message from the angels, after they're watching all these things play out. They got told the promise, they got told the events that were going to precede them, and then now they're happening in real life. Like Kyle said earlier, we're kind of doing a recap, but also in a sense of now all these things are coming into fruition. And so now with this, they're having exceeding great joy, which we'll have a link for you guys up over here, hopefully, whenever you guys get to watch it, about joy. And these guys were having exceeding great joy. I mean, what a blessing to actually hear a promise from the Father and then to witness it in your own lifetime. And then how often do we have these promises in our lifetime? Joe, I know you've shared previously one of the promises that God showed you and Vicky. And, to watch that play out, I'm sure you guys were in that same situation of exceeding great joy and now seeing the benefit and all of that play out, in your real life. So, yeah, what an awesome blessing and a testimony of Abraham and Sarah amongst all the other guys and gals in the Bible.
Absolutely. And I think we're about to read a little bit more about that joy. Also, a very joyous time throughout the year that we all love to enjoy so much. So, Joe, why don't you get us going, brother, and we'll read a little bit about that joyous time.
Absolutely. Let's jump back into it, guys. In verse 20, and it says, and he built there an altar to Yahuwah, who had delivered him, and who was making him rejoice in the land of his sojourning, and he celebrated a festival of joy in this month, 7 days near the altar which he had built at the well of the oath. And he built booths for himself and for his servants on this festival, and he was the first to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles on the earth. That's it. We'll come back to that one, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
And during the 7 days, he brought each day to the altar a burnt offering to Yahuwah, 2 oxen, 2 rams, 7 sheep, 1 he-goat, for a sin offering, that he might atone thereby for himself and for his seed. And as a thank offering, 7 rams, 7 kids, 7 sheep, 7 he-goats, and their fruit offerings and their drink offerings. And he burnt all of that fat thereof of the altar, a chosen offering unto Yahuwah for a sweet smelling savor. And morning and evening He burnt fragrant substances, frankincense and galbanum, and stacked, and nard, and myrrh, and spice, and costum, and all these 7 he offered crushed, mixed together in equal parts and pure. And he celebrated this feast during 7 days, rejoicing with all his heart and with all his soul, he and all those who were in his house. And there was no stranger with him, nor any that was uncircumcised.
So, boys, we are talking about the Festival of Joy, or otherwise known as the Festival of Booths, or Festival or Feast of Tabernacles. What an amazing time. We have a lot of fun with that every year. Man, it's so much fun. So, what you got for me, guys?
Well, I really see Abraham take like a giant leadership role here. We see that this is the first time it was celebrated ever, which is already pretty cool to know that Abraham, being told this information from the angels, written down somewhere, somehow, he was able to receive this information and now act upon it in a correct and accurate way, right? Like literally from the mouth of the angels, from the messengers, like, this is how I want you to do it. There's all these options and things we do today, but he was like, no, no, no. Back then, this was the original model, right? So he's coming in there, and what he does is he immediately takes, like I said, that leadership role. He says he builds the boost for himself and for his servants. So he's making sure that everybody's covered, everybody's doing it. We talked about earlier about being grafted in. He's like, you don't have a choice. You're grafted in no matter what. You're with me. You're a part of this covenant. You're going to do this stuff. Just like he got everyone circumcised earlier, and it says it later that everyone there was circumcised. So this whole Gentile conversation we just had, that's not here yet. Everybody here is doing the feast. Everybody here is taking care of business. So first of all, I love that. And then it says that that he was doing offerings for in 22, that he was doing offerings for the sin, that it says that he might atone thereby for himself and for his seed. And we hear a really cool example of that, same as in Job. Job said that he would always he would go that extra mile. He wouldn't just go for himself, but he would also provide sacrifices for his children, his spouse, just in case, to try to make sure everybody was covered. And it's interesting to see Abraham kind of have that same heart and mentality. And both of these guys are elevated really high in the Bible narrative of their hospitality and the way they were interacting with each other and interacting with the Father. And I like that they use the word might. It seems like there's a thought process of, I really, really want this to work, but at the same time, I know it's about the heart. God's not judging on how many, can we stack 5,000 bulls on top of the altar and everybody's covered. He's like, hey, I'm going to do my part, but you have to do your part. Your heart has to be in it. You truly have to be repentant of those sins. We can't just keep killing bulls and goats and assume that everything's going to be good to go and covered. It really is, your heart has to change and your mentality has to change. So I love that it threw that in there, and it didn't give us any excuse of like, well, if we follow this model perfectly, forget forgiveness of sin, forget Yeshua and all the stuff that he did for us. It's just stack the bulls up as higher and higher, and then we're just good to go.
So what you're saying is there was a big barbecue going on during this time of festivities.
Sounds like it. I don't think they were throwing this meat on the ground.
Here, right. Yeah, no. Here's the thing too. Jonathan, you brought up the part about before this we see the promise, we see the covenant made through the circumcision, and it wouldn't surprise me if Abraham's like, look, I have to do something nobody's gonna like, okay, but I promise you, here soon we're gonna party. We're gonna have a good time. So give me a little bit now, and I'll give you a lot more on the other end. So.
Oh boy, goodness gracious. I know we've kind of passed this part of the discussion, but I had this thought pop in my mind about the circumcision happening on the 8th day.
Mm-hmm.
We have the 7 day, the 6 days of creation, rested on the 7th day. We recognize the 7th day as being the millennial reign, right? The prophetic 1,000 years versus day of creation kind of thing. That 8th day, I'm seeing some correlation between circumcision and the new heaven and new earth type situation. At that point, when we have the new heaven and new earth, there will be no flesh remaining. All flesh at that point will be cut off. It will be only those that have their glorified bodies that remain at that point. I just thought that was pretty cool.
The cool correlation to that too, Kyle, is the fact that on the 8th day is completion. So after the 7 years of the millennial, or not 7 years, on the 7th year of the millennial with Yeshua, and like you just said, where now the earth and the heavens, everything's renewed. Everyone has their glorified body, so now it's complete. On the 8th day of what we call 8th day of creation, on that 8th day of 8,000 years later, everything's now complete. So I think that's another picture of that we're seeing here with the way the Father. He just shows us from the beginning. It says what it says that the end is declared from the beginning. So when we go back to the scriptures, go back to Genesis, and we read it, you can just see cyclically all the stories intertwining all through the scriptures, all the way up through Revelation, and all the way up to the last part of that. So it's God's showing us everywhere. I like to use the term weaving his tapestry in front of us. He's like, I'm giving it to you guys. You just gotta look, pay attention.
Yeah, and then what's interesting too, I really enjoy, again, with Abraham, when you start in 23, it starts off saying, and as a thank offering, and then it goes into the 777, all the different numbers there. And then at the very end, it says, a chosen offering unto Yahuwah for a sweet smelling savor. So, we see this part here. Earlier, he's already done the sacrifice or the offering for atonement. But now he's saying this is just a thank offering. And I think what's cool here is Abraham recognizes him being a part of the covenant was a God event. It wasn't Abraham. Yes, he did the follow up. Yes, he's setting himself apart, but none of this happens without God. And he's seeing that his son of promise only happens through the power of God. And he's starting to recognize, I think, more and more and more and more. And he's like, I'm going to set this up as a thank you offering. I just want to say thank you. And how often in our lives do we have just blessings on blessings on blessings? Our houses, our cars, our clothes, bank accounts aren't in, negative, or if they are, we seem to always find a way to get through things. And I think we sometimes forget to look at God and say, thank you. Thank you for our life. We woke up again one more time. We got to spend the time with loved ones. There's just so many things to be thankful for. And Abraham goes as far as to say it was a chosen offering. So it wasn't just, all right, 7 of you show up, all right, I'm going to kill you all, and then we're going to have some blood or whatever. It's nothing like that. He's setting this up in a very loving way, where he's saying, not only do I want to thank you, but I'm going to choose out of all my flocks and out of all these riches that only God gave him, right? God bestowed all these riches and glory on him, allowing him to win those battles against the kings and able to, get his nephew out of Sodom and Gomorrah, we talked about earlier. And here he's just saying, this is a chosen offering, and I'm choosing it to be a sweet smelling savor. I want this to be something good. I want you to recognize that I recognize how awesome you are and all the things you've done for me in my life so far. And I plan to keep this going until I die. And I think that's just a real beautiful heart and a beautiful sentiment of Abraham to the Father there.
I want to speak to that also, Jonathan. So think about it like this. First of all, we have a thank offering, right? And it says, all the fat thereof on the altar, a chosen offering unto Yahweh, a sweet smelling savor. Well, if you think about it like this, who is a good father provides and protects for his children, right? Well, we know that, first of all, when it comes to flavorful meat, a lot of that flavor comes from the fat of the animal, right? Lean meat doesn't have as good of a taste as fatty meat tends to have, right? So that's one aspect of it. So I'm actually looking this as not just a chosen offering, but a choice offering. So going to that idea of a choice offering, think about a choice meaning like the best. So lending to what you were saying, the best of his flock, but also the best of the meat as well. Think about it like this: if we were living in times where we were concerned about where our next meal might come from, you would be eating not just the meat, but the fat and all that stuff. And you would want that fat to store in your body for times when you may not have food, right? So regardless of where he's at financially, he's essentially throwing what the world would look at as life-saving sustenance for your body to store for a time when you may not have as much. He's saying, I'm not even worried about that because I know my Heavenly Father will provide for me. So I can take this, what most people would see as the choice part of the meat, the part that a lot of people look to sustain their life for the future. And I'm going to put my life in the Father's hands and say, I'm giving this to you. I
Mhm.
thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what that does smell like. I've never trimmed fat off of a steak and tossed that on the fire just to smell it. Might have to do that.
It
You'll
smells
be hungry
amazing.
afterward.
Well, I'm gonna eat the steak.
Well, I will tell you this: that if I have the choice of I have my steaks actually cut for me. I tell them to leave extra fat on there for that very reason, so that while it's grilling, the smell of it, it's amazing. That's what I'm saying. Is like this: when you throw all, you got lamb, you got beef, you got all this stuff being cooked. I mean, it's got to smell good. And I guarantee you,
Dude,
with all the spices and everything else that they had at their disposal, oh my gosh, it's probably the best rub you ever saw in your life.
right? I
So,
bet everybody was standing around with their paper plates were ready, you know? Yeah, they had them back then. They just shave off a little
please,
part.
I want some more.
Oh boy.
Oh,
Oh man.
I would
Okay.
not that it's important, but I would say this too that from a financial point, if because I've been studying a little bit on owning your own cattle, your own raising your own meat, so to speak. So that when you look at how many animals are involved here, I believe the last time I looked into it, one cow or whatever you would take to the market for slaughter, most places that's probably worth between $8,000 to $15,000 per head that they make off of the slaughtering and the selling of the meat just in today's numbers. So
Mhm.
if you were to take all these rams and the sheep and the goats and the all the everything that's in here, the bulls, all that's the oxen. In today's money, you're probably looking at probably $50,000 to $75,000 worth of real estate here. So, and then and going into that, what you said earlier was you bring your best.
Mhm.
Don't bring the sickly sheep. Don't bring the three-legged cow. Don't bring the bring and also in here talk about the fruit offering. Don't bring the fruit that's already spoiling. Don't bring the fruit that's got flies in it. Don't bring any of this stuff. I mean, and I'm sure that Abraham, of course, he knew better. So when he's bringing this, he's actually bringing the best of everything to the Father, and you definitely see the blessings that come out of his life by being
Mhm.
obedient. So,
Yeah,
Well,
those fruit offerings and drink offerings. I bet that was some good wine.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, I'm gonna need you to step it up this year for Sukkot according to the scriptures here. So, yeah, just make it happen a little bit better.
you buy it, I'll cook it. You bring the ghost, you bring everything. You buy it. If you bring it, I'll cook it. Okay,
All right,
we'll do it.
noted. But yeah, so when you look at these choice animals and these best of the fruit and whatnot, I think sometimes we also forget that this isn't just like they're putting a pile on a pile of meat and fruit on a pile of rocks and then just calling it a day. This was for them to eat and to enjoy as a meal with the Father.
Yep.
So sometimes like I said, I feel like we need to take whatever we've been learning and thinking about offerings and sacrifices and the ugly, crazy way the world has portrayed it and done it so wrong, and let our mind kind of be renewed and refreshed and say, we're bringing the best. And God says, I appreciate you for bringing that, but guess what? I'm just going to give it back to you. Now you get to eat it. It's not like God's going to come down off his throne out of way up in the firmament somewhere, come down and start eating some steak with you. Right. But he's understanding that sentiment of, hey, you came before me, you offered this, you knew what this was going to be, and you know what this entailed.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you're doing this as to maintain this covenant with me, but you're also honoring me. And I think in that process, it's this back and forth relationship. And that's that, we talk about our faith isn't just a religion, it's a relationship. And how does that look in today's world? It's kind of different. We talk about praying and reading the scripture and doing right by people, But you look at the relationship then, Abraham and Moses and all these people, they had real, almost tangible relationships with the Father. Hey, God, we're going to sit down and have a meal tonight. All right, I'll be there. I'll show up. Hey, tonight we're going to have da 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 da. And just this process of just going back and forward of every day, like Kyle was saying, they relied on this for their sustenance. Day by day, you're giving up of some of your best. These are the ones that are going to be best to reproduce. And you're saying, hey, let's just give these up as a meal and trust God that he's going to take care of the best, that he's going to handle everything else. So I just really also think that if we look at it from that perspective, it makes the story even better from the human experience. God's all about giving us the best human experience, but in line with him, in covenant with him, in his will. As long as we're staying there and maintaining that relationship, he will go through any and everything to make sure that we're protected, loved, fed, and covered. So, I mean, all the way up to the point of giving his son, right? So
That's right.
yeah, right there in the middle of 22, one of the things that we see that I thought was kind of interesting as well is, we look at what the Levites were doing, what the high priests were doing. We know about the order of Melchizedek, and it wasn't just him being a singular person, but the order of. So where did all this idea of priesthood and the requirements for it, where did that come from and where did it get established? Well, we're seeing this here with Abraham, where it says he offers the 2 oxen and the 2 rams as a sin offering that he might atone for himself, but also for his seed. So, just like all the other high priests, they always have to atone for themselves prior to atoning for anyone else. And what's interesting about that is whenever that system was shifted to Yeshua up in the heavenly tabernacle, he no longer has to make atonement for himself because he is sinless. He had no sin offering on his own accord.
Right.
Now he can just go straight to the Father on our accord, which I think that's awesome. But we do get to see this very, very early example of that play out perfectly with Abraham, and how that doesn't really change at all the way through the system up until we see Yeshua and the temple come down.
Amen.
Good stuff, guys. Good stuff. And when we get into 24 too, as well, and it talks about the burnt fragrant substances. Let me say, along with the barbecue that's going on, along with all of this, now we've got him. The fragrance here had to have been incredible. We're talking about, again, these are the purest of the pure. This isn't something you bought from the store that's watered down or not whatever. This is something that's probably filling the entire camp there with the fragrance of these spices, along with the meat that's being cooked. And just by not kind of going off too far off track, guys, but there at the beginning it does say in morning and evening. It doesn't say anything about evening to evening or anything like that. It does kind of hint towards morning, and then there was evening. So don't want to go on a rabbit trail with that. Just kind of want to throw it out there for a little bit. But I just couldn't imagine being there at this time of this celebration, and just all this is going on. And not only that, but everybody's happy. This isn't like, there's not infighting. There's not all this stuff. At this point in the game, everyone's probably like, this is really cool. This isn't a burden to do these things. It's not, weighing you down. So basically they're enjoying their time together and rejoicing, praising the Father's name. And it's just it's one of those feast times that we look forward to, again, like we said earlier. That's coming up very shortly for us in about another 3 weeks or so, 3.5 weeks. We'll be going and hopefully doing the same thing together and rejoicing. And we won't have as much steak there as they're having here now, but it'll still be a good thing, though.
Absolutely. And speaking of rejoicing, I wanted to bring up in verse 25 down here where it says, and he celebrated this feast during 7 days, rejoicing with all his heart and with all his soul. He and all those who were in his house. Man, I am so looking forward to celebrating this feast with my brothers and sisters. It's going to be an amazing time. Guys, we hope you all will celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles this year and really, really take this into consideration. It's not just about getting out there and camping and being out, talking around a campfire at the end of the night or whatever. This is a time for rejoicing with all of your heart and with all of your soul. So be intentional about it. Plan for it. understand why you're doing it. It's an amazing celebration, and it really will get you in the right headspace and right heart space in connection with the Father for who He is and how He loves and how He takes care of His children. And with that, guys, we will see you next time for part 3 of chapter 16 in the book of Jubilees. God bless.
Ciao.
Shalom.